Welcome to the Brooklyn Rails new social environment. I'm Charlie Schultz, the Rails managing editor, but today I have the pleasure and the privilege of being the master of ceremonies. A few quick notes before we get started. We'll be recording this meeting for the Rail archive. If you would prefer not to be seen, you can disable your camera by pressing the stop video button in the bottom left-hand corner of your screen. We'll keep the audience on mute until question time, which I will kick off about 45 minutes to an hour through the talk. The last couple of days, we've been joined by trolls who have used the chat bar rather inappropriately. If this happens, we will lock the chat bar until the trolls have been filtered out. We will try and keep the chat bar open, and you're welcome to introduce yourself in the chat bar and make comments. That's the place where you should put your questions. If you have questions, I will be calling on people at the Q&A towards the end and referring to the questions in the chat bar. John will be helping out with the tech if you have any questions, and Miko will be typing closed captions to make our talk more accessible today. Now, I turn it over to two guests who need no introduction, Phong H and Julian Schnabel.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Charlie. Thank you, Julian. This is an equivalent of our public conversation, which was scheduled on March 26th at the site of Julian's current show, The Patch of Blue, The Prisoner Calls the Sky at Paves, and it will be on view on the gallery website till April 18. I urge you to see it. But here we are, all of us in our homes, trying to maximize the pleasure that we get out of our love for the arts and humanities, not the politics that will get us through this strange time. And I'm very pleased to have Julian, and I know that Julian and I can talk when we're not working. So we gotta be more specific here. So I like this conversation as a second part to the first, the one that I did in his previous show at Almond Reich in 2017. The published interview was in September issue of that year. So I would love to be more specific here. In other words, for example, ask an issue and question how Julian deploy images that relay and refer to mark making that can be felt and seen or translate into a variety of things like wounds, punctures, and trapping devices and so on, and why he's always able to keep them fresh and alive. And then, of course, I'd like to add the issue of, for example, materials. In their unorthodox application, he uses surface all sorts like tarpaulin and burlap, velvet, nylon, silk cloth, drop cloth, cowhide, linoleum.
Maybe we should just look at the paintings.
Also, I get there. All right. And then the painting tool, we're not going to go into it. And then this issue of scale. I like to also thank Louise, Julian's wife, and Omar for making this selection. So let's just go directly. He can be impatient. So let's start with the first image, very old painting, which I like quite a lot. I think he might have made this after a year or so, having graduated from University of Texas. This painting is cool.
Yeah, I didn't go to the University of Texas.
Yeah.
I actually made that painting in 1974 in the basement of the Immigrant Savings Bank. I was in the Whitney Independent Study Program.
Mm-hmm.
And so anyway, I think Phong wanted to show that painting because it's called Formal Painting and His Dog.
Yeah.
Also, I guess it says the size of the painting on the bottom. So, I mean, it's 8 by 6 feet. We could make the image a bit bigger, Jeremy. Yeah. And so it's quite different than a lot of the other paintings, but there was, it says Formal Painting and His Dog. So there's a grid there, and maybe you ought to say why you wanted to show it. I didn't feel a need to do that, but you did, Phong.
I did. I just felt that it was your own way of, essentially shooting at the grid of the minimalist, idea of formal, formal aspect and whatnot. And the fact that you shot it in the middle, right up on the right of the ribcage, the torso. So I thought it was a very interesting just position, partly because the grid flat, there's no body in it, and then against the dark, which is sculptural. So it just brings up this two ongoing back and forth, you know, between flatness and sculptural form, between, you know, luster and warmth and evoking, but there's also very affection. There's affection.
Well, the dog is rubbed in with a towel also. It was just,
yeah.
So,
And I like to point out also, Julian, the use of text is already there, and his dog. So just keep that in mind. We go through, you know, throughout the works here. Can we go to the second one, Jeremy? Yeah. So this is Julian. I mean, this is the beginning of your love of film. I know that you love film way before this, but this is very interesting. Acatone was named after Pasolini's film. So it's an incomplete bust on the pedestal. Can you say a few more words about this painting?
well, this painting was done 4 years after the other one. And basically I felt like I needed to create a receiver somehow for any imagery that was going to be in a painting. So rather than accepting the predetermined stretcher that I bought in a art supply store and canvas, so I needed somehow to personalize the ground somehow, and so I basically covered the surface with modeling paste, and then cut a hole in the surface, built a little kind of mail slot behind it, and so I felt like the object could now receive an image. And I thought if I was going to paint something that seemed to be a figurative image, I didn't want to do it in a manneristic way to where, for example, if you think of, say, there was a lot of, if you think of figurative painters in the 20th century, most of them have a style. Whether if it's a Francis Bacon painting, it kind of looks like a figure that Francis Bacon would make, or Richard Lindner painting, or an Alfred Leslie painting, or in general, there was a kind of mannerism about the way that the figure was drawn. Whether I liked the paintings or not, it was just something that I was trying to get away from. So I was trying to invent for myself a surrogate for the figure. I also felt like the skin of the painting was like the skin of a human, and so it was a body and a skin, and so the skin of the surface was punctured, and I kind of wanted to have a disagreement between what was pictorial and what was an object. And I think throughout, we can keep going. We can look at another painting. And yeah, I did like the film Acatone by Pasolini quite a bit. This is a painting called Saint Sebastian, born in 1951, and that particular painting was made, started in 75 and finished in 79, but I kind of built this thing so it looked sort of like a garage door. It had grooves on it, and a hole cut in as if it was a window that had been blocked up, and then so it looked like a found object. And so that was a receiver for this. And then I painted this surrogate for the figure, which was this form that looks kind of like a torso, or maybe a part of it. It has, in a way, also the veins sort of look like cracks, or what do they call the cracks that are in a tree, in the trunk of a tree, on the bark. I don't know, it's escaping me right now, whatever it is. But I think that there's a kind of similarity of biological parallel between the veins in your hands, the veins in a leaf, the cracks in things, and just the way that things break up biologically. So there's a couple of things going on here, but in this particular painting, at one moment I had painted a little yellow hat into it, but I painted it out about 10 times because I felt like every time you saw that particular yellow shape, you could rest. And I wanted the painting to be more relentless, so I painted it out. Later, that issue seemed to change. But anyway, this painting's up at the Museum of Modern Art in Amy Tillman's show. If whenever it reopens, one could go see it.
Yes. And I was very interested how it was hanging on the left, Julian. And to its right, opposite, is our friend Ron Woodchop's painting. It just brings to mind the idea of how Ron described the two dissimilar mark being a kind of a formal divide, a trapping space or whatnot, wound again. But I think in a way, I want to ask this question in regard to the torso, the incomplete torso, because it reoccurs throughout your work, and it takes different permutation and form and whatnot, as we see later. But I just want to ask this question: where does the image torso come from? Incomplete torso, truncated torso. How did it occur? How did it come about?
You got me.
Okay. All right, well, let's just go forward. And
I obviously needed, excuse me, I needed to do that, and I didn't particularly want to paint a head.
Yeah.
Probably. So in this particular one, the body seems to, the arm turned into a conical form where there are different sort of marks. But again, this painting, it's called Procession for Jean Vigo, who was a French filmmaker. He made the film L'Atlante and Zero for Conduct.
Great filmmaker.
Great filmmaker, died young. And this particular painting, it's made with wax also, but this white triple helix that's on top of it seems to be superimposed on the rest of the painting. So there's a different kind of temporality in works where you feel like one person might have done something and time might have passed and someone else added something or came by, not dissimilar from the way, say, a staircase in an 11th century church would be modified in the 14th century and then again in the 20th century. And you have all of this sort of this confluence of different moments and different decisions that people make that become our present. Yeah, and
Julian, the T form right on top, where it swung the other object, the belt-like object, you know, that to me, it reoccur in a different form. For example, the sculpture that it's right in your house in Montauk. Yeah, exactly. So that's like decade or more later, but again, it also reappear a lot in the painting that Rudy Fuchs talked about, Golgotha.
Right. Yes.
Yes.
The thing is that this T shape obviously refers to the cross, and so there was a moment in American art where I think that people wanted to get away from their European baggage, and that was a necessity, I think, for some, because they wanted to have a new American art from this side of the Atlantic Ocean. But I didn't have that problem, and I felt that I still had things in in Western art that were and European art that were still useful to me. And so in particular, this image of this cross with these sort of lanterns on it, in the film Zero for Conduct, when there's this riot in this boys' school, there's an old monitor who was sleeping, and they propped his bed up while he was sleeping, and they put what might have been a broomstick upside down with two lanterns off it. So it was called the Crucifixion of Dryfart. And they marched through the couloir of their dormitory, and they had a pillow fight. And so when these kids are walking through there, their gowns are moving up and down, and obviously the feathers are all broken out of the pillowcases, so it looks like snow. And so I think I responded to that also, not that you'd see it in the painting, but the other thing is that Sigmar Polka and I used to go to the Don Quixote Lounge next door to the Chelsea Hotel.
Yes.
And if anybody remembers the wallpaper over there, or the painting, it looked like windmills, and it's pink and black. And I think that had something to do with this particular painting also.
Yeah, well, I just want to make sure that I'll just mention in that so that our listener aware of the fact that Zero de Conduit was a silence film. So everything had to do with the narrative is through bodily function and the moving image and whatnot. And that was a very important film for Vigo because it's revealed his anarchist view. For his father, the very famous anarchist activist named Miguel Amada. And so everything tied together. Can we go to the next image? Because I think it showed Julian beginning to shift a new direction here entirely. The plate painting.
Yeah, so there was a wax painting on the back wall. That was in the studio on 20th Street in 1978. So that's the third and fourth plate painting. One is on the left, circumnavigating the Sea of Shit, and the one behind it is Divan. But the wax painting in front is called Hospital Patio Baboon in Summer. It was for William Burroughs, who I knew. Anyway, that was a studio that I had. I had built it inside of the studio on 20th Street, so I didn't get to see the windows for a while. I rented out the front so I could pay the rent. Anyway, I don't know if there's another picture. I might have taken that where we were working on the floor. So yeah, that might not be there.
Yeah.
But that's the first plate painting, The Patients and the Doctors.
This is the one that Peter owns? Julian?
No, this painting I own.
Oh, okay. Okay.
This is a painting that I sold for $2,500 and bought back for a lot of money. Well, actually, it went to auction. Anina Nozay had it, and I said I'd trade her back the fifth plate painting for the first one, and she could sell that. So I basically got the painting back, and I've had it since, I don't know. I've had it since, I don't know, for what, 40 years.
Yeah. So again, I mean, the torso appear right on the pedestal there. Vaguely, you can see it around the middle to the right, and this body-like and tooth-like form on the other side, and the slash.
Bark. The word I was looking for before was bark, the bark of the tree.
Right, that's it. Yeah.
But anyway, so there was a similarity in forms, like the bark of a tree, the cracks in things, and so I was looking for a kind of another way to make a mark, mm-hmm. and another way to use materials. So if you, and the drawing in these paintings was quite diagrammatical. I didn't know how much drawing to put in them or what kind of image it was supposed to be. So I was just sort of, you know, you asked me why I painted the torso. I think that it's kind of a, you know, sometimes people can give you an answer, but it doesn't mean it's true.
Okay.
But what I did do when I made this painting, I was drawing on one side of the plate, mm-hmm. and putting a shadow on the other side. And I realized that when the plates, they had a different reflectivity, if that's mm-hmm. a word, than the depth of field of the Bondo auto body putty or dental plaster that I was using. But for example, it's interesting to me, you know, I went to see Don Judd's show at the Museum of Modern Art, which I think is really, really great. And I saw that first blue painting at the entrance to the show with a white mark on it. Yeah. And then you go in and you see where he had found ready-made an O that he used, and there was a pink surface around it that looked like a plaster. And then there was one painting he had with a little window in it with that I hadn't seen, with a metal box in it. And I think that obviously, I don't think it had anything to do with minimalism, what he wanted to do. I think he wanted to find something particular to himself.
Yeah.
He wanted to separate color from the object in some way, or find a way that was personal to him to, and I think that at a certain moment, an artist looks for a way that they can find a path for themselves, and they might not know what that path is, but they need to build the things in order to see that.
Yeah.
And so, you know, when I made this painting, obviously I thought that the plates, in a sense, had a character of their own, like brushstrokes. And the other thing is that there was already stuff printed on them, so they came with a history.
Yeah.
There was like a palimpsest where you had, so there was you know, I've always been interested in simultaneity of time. So I felt like there were a lot of different signals that were being sent out by this thing, besides the fact that it was flat in some places and it came out from the wall about a foot. And I had never seen a painting that looked like that, so I thought that was probably a good thing.
Great, that's terrific. Can we move on to next? Because this is the one that really, I remember seeing it too, Julian, and I was so perplexed of how and why you decided that the upper panel without the plates.
Right. Well, obviously, I was thinking about, first of all, when I first made the first plate painting, and people would come over to look at it, I would cover up the other paintings because I didn't want them to. I didn't want to have a series of each experience to be that in itself.
Yeah.
Obviously, that changed later. I didn't know how many plate paintings I would make either. I thought that I just wanted each one to be an epiphany. So as I was working, this is a painting that was made in 1980. Yeah, I had figured, okay, well, I can actually paint an image that's more recognizable as something that it might refer to that you could recognize, not just something that was necessarily just diagrammatical. Like, for example, you still have this red shape on the right-hand side that was in acetone.
Yes, absolutely.
But it's St. Francis in Ecstasy. Now, this is an Ethiopian that came out of a magazine. The skull comes from I can't remember which painting of St. Francis in Ecstasy the skull came from, but I mean, in a sense, it's sort of like a computer chip run amok. And so rather than just have the whole surface cover, I wanted to see what it would be like to break up the panel and see how that would, we're all, basically all the elements are always speaking to each other in some way, but you have one kind of painting that is having a dialogue with another kind of painting, and it's all happening in the same painting.
Yeah, would it be fair, before we move on to the next one, Jeremy, the torso, truncated torso, would it be fair to say that it could relate to your own body in some way, as for scale?
You could say that if you want to. I think probably when I called Saint Sebastian, born in 1951, I was thinking that it was sort of a self-portrait, even though my body doesn't look like that.
Okay.
There was also some photographs that Jimmy DeSana took of a guy that was probably a thalidomide baby or whatever, that I remember seeing, and I was surprised at that. So I think the idea of how to draw a figure, and, you know, does a figure have to have arms? Does a figure have to have a head? Maybe, you know, this shape actually turns into a poplar tree in other paintings, or a statue in other paintings, or it just becomes something that doesn't have a name.
Yeah.
Let's see what happens in the next painting.
Yeah.
You can make that bigger because this is quite a big painting. It's belongs to the Guggenheim, but I've never seen it up there. Yes.
This one have the title, The Student of Prague. Is that relate to your father's upbringing at all?
Well, one thing, there was a book about expressionistic film.
Mm-hmm.
And there was some kind of an image from it that said the student of Prague. I like the title, obviously, because my father was Czech.
Yes.
And so maybe it was for him.
Okay.
Because I was looking at this painting the other day, and I've been looking at some of Harmony Korine's paintings, and it's got a guy that looks like that in some of them, that he, this sort of snowman type figure.
Yeah, that snowman type figure, take notice everyone, because it will reoccur in different form and shape later, even in the circle painting toward the end, or the Julian very amazing sculpture named Helen of Troy, for example. So it turned into sculpture form. Keep going.
This is 1983, so I was actually making sculptures at that time already. And this painting was shown at Leo Castelli's gallery on Green Street. And so there were sculptures in that show also. And there's holes cut out of this also. If you look at the top, there's windows in the that I filled up. And then there are pieces of wood that are going through here. And there's a piece of wood, and it says "Starting to Sing" on it, which was a part of a group of 4 paintings. One was a head of Antonin Artaud made from a self-portrait that he made that was painted out in Amagansett. Anyway, this is at 9 by 19 feet, I think, this painting. So I made some plate paintings that were this size, and it's interesting because the scale of the plates shrunk when the size of the painting was bigger.
Right.
But the thing about when you were talking about the human body, if you think we all eat off plates, so I mean, people that are living in some kind of, I wouldn't call anybody civilized anymore, particularly. I mean, but in a different than Corys that live out in that are not using plates necessarily, but there's a familiarity to those things and size that keeps a sense of scale in your head.
Absolutely.
So let's see another one. This painting, same size. It's called The Walk Home.
Well, and, this is Peter owns, I think, right?
What'd you say?
This is the one that Peter owns.
No, this belongs to Eli Broad.
Oh, okay.
And I painted this painting after seeing the Van Gogh show at the Met, because there was so much yellow in all of his paintings, and I felt like I don't really want to describe the paintings this way, but what the fuck? I mean, you know, we can do that, and it doesn't matter really what I say. But I imagined him walking home through a park in Arles in February. So it was very cold and very sunny at the same time. But it's interesting because when I was making this painting, Cy Twombly came over to my studio, and there was a drawing on the floor of these purple shapes that look kind of like, I don't know if it looks like the mouth of a shark or they look like bean pods or those things that you find on the beach, those black things that you don't know the name of. But anyway, Cy saw this little drawing on the floor. He said, "Can I have that?" I said, "Yeah, sure." And he's picked another one up of a mummy, and he said, "Can I have that?" I said, "Yeah, you can have that one too." And he said, "Okay, I'll give you something for those someday." And years later, I went to his house. He wasn't there, but I saw those 2 little drawings that were on the floor, framed in these 16th century Florentine frames near his bed. No. And he didn't know I was coming, so that was really a nice thing. And then my parents, when they were alive, we were in Rome, and we went over to his house, and Cy gave me 2 very beautiful drawings for those things that were really just lying around the floor like junk. But that was a nice thing.
Yeah, those shapes, Julian. This painting, I think, somehow is both anguish and very peaceful at the same time. And those, you know, shapes, the black shape, it's kind of almost remind me of the you know, Van Gogh last painting, crawls over the wheat field, you know?
Well, yeah, I mean, if that's what it reminds you of, that's what it reminds you of. I didn't think about that, but I do think that, yeah, that's not really black. It's mineral violet. It's purple, but it looks kind of like black.
Yeah.
in this picture, but these paintings are kind of hard to photograph, but it's it's nice to see them in real life. I think I have also finials from the Woolworth building and the bronze tree with the little, there's stuff you can't even see in it. So why don't we just look at another one? But this, yeah, it's a painting that that I like quite a bit. And
yeah, so this is a new series here where the use of material changes again and clashing between big, broad, abstract shape over figurative form.
what did you say? What did you say?
It's a clash.
You said big. I thought you said Nick Rhodes. No, yeah, big, broad. Yeah, big, broad. Yeah, this is a painting from 1997.
Yeah.
Of Albert Olin, who's a friend of mine, and he was in Spain visiting with me. To the audience, we're not in a chronological order. We're just going to jump around a bit from painting to painting as it serves Phong and me, or whatever comes up, I'll talk about. But so I painted Albert from life. I was in Venice, staying at Giovanni Volpe's house on the Grand Canal, and he had all these paintings of procurators in this palace, and I just thought they needed a little white. But I couldn't deface the paintings in his house, so when I went home, I made my own antique paintings, and then I could put white on top of them. So basically, I painted Albert. Can we get closer? Even if we lose the edge, just bring it closer so we can see Albert's face. You could just make it as close as you can, Jeremy. Keep coming.
Yeah.
Yeah, so basically, that's good. So I painted Albert. I had a garage down on the bottom of the house in San Sebastian, and he was visiting, and then I painted it with oil paint. And first I painted the ground brown, Venetian red, or burnt sienna. You can pull out now, Jeremy. That's really, you're doing a good job. Thank you. Just, it will pull out. And then I, after painting it in oil paint, you can keep going further out. I covered it in resin.
Yeah.
It was a two-part mixture like fiberglass.
Yeah.
And then, so it was a modern way of putting glazing on that you, so you looked at a painting that looked like it was made in the 18th century, but at the same time, it looked like it was made now. And the frame was part of it also. It was the 16th century Italian frame that I cast in fiberglass. And then I put some white house paint on top of it. And that's about it.
Yeah. Let's see a few more, because some of them are beginning to relate to some particular Spanish painter that you love, with the Velasco, Goya, or, you know.
Okay, so anyway, this is, let's get a little closer to this one also, just for a minute, just so you can see. This is Amada Nasario. Look at her face for a minute, up close. So basically, you know, you try to paint, and painters try to paint in every way that they can, maybe, I don't know. But I felt like, for example, if you look under her nose, this is just one mark that is the light that's hitting the top of her lip, and that makes her, that little piece, whatever you call it, between the nose and the top of your lip. But, so that also was painted in the studio in San Sebastian. And basically it was a garage, and the light was coming from the top.
Yeah.
And obviously there's shadows that might reflect where some light source is coming, but you don't know if it's necessarily the shadow of Amada or the shadow of the white shape. So there's an ambiguity about that. And there's sort of, I guess, in the same way that there were quotes or catalog of ways of painting, like, for example, in the St. Francis in Ecstasy painting, there's certain things or signifiers that open up questions or keys to other kind of painting from different times. So I feel like also painting is a time map. it brings you into its present whenever that is. So you could see a Caravaggio painting now and it would bring you into its present. It's not in the past. So the paintings are always alive.
In this instant, the white form seemed to be like a sculpture that casts a shadow. So I like that relationship quite a bit.
Okay. We could keep going.
Yep.
Yeah, and then these paintings were painted considerably. I think the other ones were from 1997. I painted this in 2014.
Mm-hmm.
The pair of them. In fact, I don't know if you want to put the two of them together in this one, Jeremy. Can you do that, or does that screw up your format?
He's gonna try.
Okay. There you go. Okay, we can just go. Yeah, go back. Yeah. Okay, we can make it a little closer. So I painted these paintings in, what was it, 2014?
Mm-hmm.
So I painted Tatiana Lizovskaya as the Duchessa de Alba, Goya painting, but these were 11 feet tall. I painted them from life, but I obviously liked the way that the Duchessa de Alba was dressed. Yeah. And I painted them quickly. I mean, they were painted mostly finger painting. The whole landscape is done with my fingers. And then I painted the dress and the body with a brush, and then poured this white enamel paint on top of them later. But it's very satisfying to try to paint a Goya painting. Obviously, it's not going to look like a Goya painting. You know, Arshile Gorky kept trying to paint Picasso's, but they kept coming out looking like Arshile Gorky's, he said. Yes,
absolutely.
But so what I'm saying is, or why we're showing these, is those pictures took place in 1997. Yeah. These were made in 2014, but there's a kind of, it doesn't really end at one moment. Painting is an open-ended kind of road, and it takes you to other things. And so you kind of arrive at a place and it reopens itself. And yeah. I don't really have a hierarchical notion of something that's figurative or something that's not. And so I could treat the panel that has a woman on it in the same way that I would treat it if it was just a piece of corduroy drop cloth. Mm-hmm. And to me, it would still be a painting, and they would have an equivalence. So we'll see that as we move along.
So these painting, okay, let's go to the big girl painting, Jeremy, because I wanted to point it out to everyone, particularly, yeah. That painting, I saw it at Gagosian.
We want to look at both of this. It's maybe not bad in this particular case. Why don't we look at the one yeah, thank you, Jeremy.
Yeah, so this is an instant where, you know, instead of just floating around interrupting the picture plane or the image, this one, you painted the eyes out. And I know that when your father asked you, why did you do that for? And you said, so you can look elsewhere, like the nose or the mouth. I thought it was the most intelligent thing to say. Yeah, so but it repeated. I mean, you didn't just make one. There's a whole series of them.
Yeah, there were 4 big ones like that, and then 4 a little bit. Yeah, there was, yes. There were 5 that were 7.5 by 7 feet, and 5 that were 9 by 8 feet, and there were these 4. Yeah, but they're finger paintings. Basically, it's a finger painting, and it's a painting that I bought in a. Can you see me? People can see me right now or not?
Yeah.
People see me while I'm talking to you?
Yeah.
Okay, hang on one second.
You can just speak.
What? Oh.
Oh yeah, cool.
Okay, so this is a painting that a woman made of her daughter in, I don't know, the 50s at some moment, or.
Uh-huh.
And I was actually driving around with Nick Sirota in Houston, and went to a junk store, and there was these found paintings, and I just so I painted the purple marks on that in 1988.
Mm-hmm.
And then 13 years later, I used a found painting with the marks that I had made on it, which I felt like were found marks also, and painted this finger painting from them. And then the only part that's painted with a palette knife is the purple line that goes where her eyes would have been and the purple mark on the bottom. She never had any eyes. I never painted any eyes there.
Yeah. Okay.
Anyway, that painting is what, 13 feet and a half. And it was interesting because we were planning a show with Udo Kittelman that's not going to happen, where we were going to show these paintings with Andy's Mao paintings.
Ah, okay.
At Burger Bahnhof, but that's not going to happen. He's not going to be there anymore. But anyway, it was a nice thought because they're around the same size.
Yeah, that's interesting. So so from moving from here to the next set of few images, you see how Julian jumped to a different kind of.
Let's see, what's the date on this? This is 1994. So this was before that.
Before that, right.
And there was a group of paintings called Last Attempt at Attracting Butterflies. Where I had taped off an edge and I painted this pink that faded up into the white.
Yeah.
And then I walked on it to kind of irritate the surface to where it kind of had flicks of color and movement off of these black lines that were drawn on there. I made some that were also had green in them too. In fact, Albert Olin owns one of these paintings. And actually he made a bunch of paintings that look like that are pink.
Yes, I see.
Trees on them.
Mm-hmm.
Past few years. But there were 4 of these.
Yeah.
But I thought I would throw one in because, again, it's you've got a raw canvas, and then the white that looks like paper is gesso, so it's taped, and then I obviously put that there and then destroyed that or disregarded it once it was pristinely painted. So it was one layer of meaning, and then there was another layer of meaning, which was the whatever black marks mean.
Yeah, thank you. This is terrific. Can we move to the next one, which is this painting?
Yeah, okay. And then this is a painting from 1986. So, and the reason I put it in here because, well, it's a kabuki painting.
Yeah.
I did not paint the mountains or the ground. This is something that was given to me. And I made about 13 kabuki paintings. And so I painted the head, and I painted the marks on it and the bush in the corner and some white in the sky. And, you know, when Joseph Beuys died, I wanted to make some resurrection paintings for him. Yeah. And I felt like, or rebirth paintings. And so I thought when this person gave me these backdrops that it was a possibility to not be a slave to the appearance of your work that came before. And like the Chinese calligraphers used to say, they would change their name mid-career to start over as somebody else. So I thought that was an opportunity to make a work of art that had a different kind of appearance. And in fact, this painting was, and this group of paintings was painted right before the paintings from Seville, the recognition paintings that were the word paintings. So they really had a radically different kind of appearance, but they were painted in more or less the same time.
By the way, Julian, it's not just calligrapher. They do it in restaurant too. In Chinese restaurant in New York, if the business is not going well from having happy Buddha, they change it to garden delight, you know?
Exactly. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to leave them out.
No, not at all. Can you go to the next one? Yeah, this is the one that
we can make that a little small. Yeah, so the reason why I kind of wanted to see the other one is because obviously there's a sort of ethnographic element to things. I mean, you look at that other work, you think that it looks like, if anybody knows anything about the kabuki theater or has seen those images, they're not new. This is an image of a Chinese figure in like a bow of a tree that looks like a spoon or something. And so there was a mirror that this was enameled onto, and I made an image of that and then printed it on paper from a normal computer. And when I took it out to Montauk, the rain and the sun bleached it to this sort of turquoise color. And so I photographed that. And in fact, if you get up close, there's even mildew on there that's actually printed. You can get even closer, and because I was just as interested in the, and then these marks that you can see are made in, there's resin poured on, the same resin that was used for these, the shiny paintings, but also that's a nice place to stop. There's, I was using a tablecloth and throwing it at the surface in order to make marks that looked like they were printed.
Yeah.
So yes, there's a process or part of my work that has to do with printing.
Yes.
Taking printed things, and even though there was printing on the plates in the first place also. So the idea of taking things that already exist or that have been, and commandeering their use for another set of intentions or uses was something that is part of my interest. And I guess it goes from things that have images that are printed on them to images that are just of materials that don't have specific images printed on them.
Yeah.
So
yeah. It would be fair, Julian, to imply that they are repurposing a notion or an idea of ready-made in your own view.
Yeah, I mean, Jeff Koons and I were having a conversation for the New York Times, and I was saying, you know, he presents the new to make some, and I guess what I do is I present the old in a new way.
Got it.
But it was funny to think that the things that I presented looked old, and but let's see something else.
Yeah, let's go quickly.
Oh yeah, here we go.
Mm-hmm.
So obviously, if you think of, say, the Kabuki painting and what was happening there, there's a given. So this particular painting had was Dufour wallpaper.
Yeah.
And there were actually army guys in it. George Washington was accepting Cornwallis's sword in the original wallpaper, and then my daughter Stella had found this goat on Houston Street, and so I had a stuffed goat with a rabbit on his head and superimposed it into the wallpaper. In this particular painting, I took the men out, but by extracting some of the images, I put a different plinth that or mountain peak that the goat's standing on, and but there's a kind of addition and subtraction or a manipulation of the image, and then obviously it's a ground to paint on, and then there's in this particular one there's the paint is on the surface.
Yeah.
Sometimes I use ink and I use a hose and it's bleeding into the material, but I wanted to do this one to where the paint, actually the oil paint, sat on the surface. We could again get closer to this if you want, Jeremy, for a moment. Yeah, you want to take that arrow and leave it there. It looks, because it looked like a fly or something like that. Okay, but anyway.
Okay, so let's see with a few more set that before we actually see the recent work, Jeremy, because there are a few that I felt it's important to bring up just because.
I mean, I'm in no rush. I don't care, you know, if you.
Yeah, I just wanted to show some of the early work, just going back and forth. Again, it's not chronological, but
okay.
Remember.
So this painting is what, from 1982?
82, yeah, and it's painted on velvet. You made a whole body of work in that year on velvet, and it's just so different than the rest, the way how the oil was absorbed by the velvet, which is behave differently than whether it's tarpaulin or, you know, linen or whatnot. So I just wanted to see whether you can recall this body of work in that period, Julian. Why velvet particularly?
Well, this is one of For Maria Callas' paintings.
Yeah.
And that's aluminum, that silver is aluminum paint that's on that particular one. And it was purple. It's pretty, there's a lot of paint on that. It's hard to see the lavender in there. And obviously we're only looking at one velvet painting, but I made quite a few of them.
Yeah.
And there's different kinds of drawing from one painting to the next. And this one, there's no images that you can actually name, but there are other ones that are, and you know, people can look them up. Obviously, if they're interested, there's a website where you could see velvet paintings. But I thought it was great to be able to look at one of those catalogs from a store and pick all of these colors that had so much saturation, and they were already done. Yeah. And so basically I bought the material from swatches, and if I wanted, I could pick all these different colors. And first I started making black velvet paintings, and then you know, one would think, oh, that's about kitsch or something like that, but that's not really, you know, that could have been fine, but that's not exactly what I was interested in. I was interested in how the paint sat on it, and how if you put modeling paste down on it, the paint would sit on top of the surface. If you didn't, it was very porous. And so it had a whole different kind of depth of field that was very interesting to me, because I was doing it at the same time as I was making the plate paintings.
Yeah, yeah. So
it's like being a crop rotator. You know, you can plant potatoes for a while, and then you want to, you know, plant carrots there. And so
yes. So from this painting to the next one, Jeremy, I just want to show the next one, partly to show the way in which how you can respond to not only the material but also what's there. You know, in this instant, it's really a boxing ring that was painted by our friend Jamie Nair. And have all the accumulated history there, the gaffer tape and whatnot, and you respond to this surface differently than the last one.
Yeah.
So just, you know, elaborate on that a little bit. Just how do you decide just to do that simple 3-line looping, you know, with a certain gravity, and then the painted form right in the middle to the bottom?
Well, you know, when you find something that is really, really great, you don't want to fuck it up.
Okay.
I mean, it was pretty good before I even touched it.
Yeah.
I had the gaffer's tape archivally glued down so it would stay there.
I see.
But all those stains on that created this infinite space. And also the gaffer's tape, I like that material also. I mean, and it looked like one of those what do they call them? Where they have inside of a radio, they have these where all of the spark plugs or the, you know, all those different.
Right.
Anyway.
Can we, okay, so the next one is...
Wait, just go back. We're not going to leave this painting yet. So basically, I think around that time, I think maybe I was thinking about the way that in Raging Bull, there were these these close-up view of the boxing ring, and the blood was dripping off of this thing in a close-up.
Yeah.
Or I thought, okay, maybe this seems like it's sort of a necklace or something that's a scale of something that's much, much bigger.
Yeah.
And I thought the other shape on the bottom felt like an anvil or something. But that being said, whether it looked like an anvil or not, there's a little white drip that comes out of it. There's a sort of a gesture of it. I didn't think that I needed to do anything else. And sometimes I think that you don't have to do too much. All you have to do is present something.
Yeah, great. Thank you. So can we go the next one just to show the ship of material?
Okay, so that's a painting from the Tati paintings from 1990. What is that? 97 or no?
80,
When?
89, 1989.
89. Yeah. Okay, so I showed those with Yvon Lambert in Paris. Basically, that particular material is covering the Tati. It's the awning from the Tati store, which is there's a the slogan of the store is the cheapest price, le plus bas prix.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, so and they usually have those in neighborhoods that are for where the things are inexpensive.
Yeah.
And so, but you could kind of see them dotting the landscape, these stores with that awning. So I went in there and I asked them if I could buy the awning.
Yeah.
But they thought I was nuts and didn't want to talk to me particularly. But this woman, Andre Putman, who was an architect and designer, was a friend, and she talked to them and knew who she was, and she made it possible for me to buy the awning.
Yeah.
And then I started making these paintings, and I said to Azzedine Alaya, who was a really close friend of mine, why don't you make a deal with them, and you should make some stuff out of this material, because this is the cheapest price and your stuff is so expensive, but it's really with the people. People use this stuff, so why don't you, so he did. He made a line of clothes with hot pants and all sorts of things that were really great, and he made an espadrille and a bag for them, and so he made a whole line of Tati clothes. But I made about 13 paintings with this.
So yeah, amazing. Well, can we see the next one, because it's on a carpet?
It's on a rug. Yeah, it's a rug. It's a Zoom solitaire.
Yeah.
And obviously, you know, I'm always sort of looking at things and seeing things happening to them. I mean, once when I made the painting of on the kabuki backdrop, I actually met the man who painted the painting, and
Yeah.
somebody was translating for us in Japan and said, well, what do you think? And I said, what do you think? And he said to me, well, I never would have thought of painting that on there.
Okay.
Anyway, let's keep going. Yeah, that's painted on an awning that was covering a butcher shop in the Atlas Mountains.
Mm-hmm.
And so the red part was rolled up, and the part at the bottom that kind of looks like a landscape or something it's been burnt by the sun.
Mm-hmm.
And so sometimes, you know, the sun does a lot of the work for you, and you know, I kind of see things that are possibilities that are compelling for me to paint on. So this was painted on plastic.
Yeah. Wow. Okay.
That's 2007. I wish there was another one where it actually looks like the landscape of New York, but it's just dirt.
Similar to the next one, Jeremy.
Yeah. So for example, this material, I made a group of pictures called Atlas Mountains, and this material was covering the floor in Ray Smith's studio.
Yeah.
He had an oil leak there, so we put this stuff down so people wouldn't track the oil into his house. But these marks, the floorboards came through and made these horizontal marks. And you don't see it as much in that one as in some of the other ones. Yeah. But some that were closer to the oil stain are much darker. And then this is a bridle from the market in Marrakesh that's hanging in the middle of that. And there were 5 paintings like this. Some are darker, and they kind of look more like the lagoon in Venice. They seem like you're looking at water.
Yeah. Let's see whether we also going to look at one Siva painting. I think the next one will be.
No, change things around. This is a painting that was painted on material that was covering a toy store in the jungle in Mexico,
Yeah.
and was one of the first paintings made with that. Basically, I had it patched together, and it just has spray paint on it and some white gesso. But the irregular shape is because I was hanging it off of a piece of wood that was between two palm trees, and so there was a wooden stick at the top and at the bottom. So when the weight of the material at the bottom caused this arch in the sides, and I thought it'd be better to replicate that in the stretcher than make it rectangular.
Yeah, I see. So it's
And that's what's the size of that painting? I don't know. It's move it up a little bit, Jeremy. Yeah,
it's big.
yeah, it's 9 by 15 feet or something.
Yeah, great.
Okay, let's and the spray paint is nice the way the spray paint goes on this porous material. So obviously that speaks to using velvet or using different things where there's different, the way paint sits on material is very important to me.
Yeah. Well, it's you have been using it now in this show. We'll get to that in a minute. But let's see whether we can get a...
We can keep going.
I mean,
yeah.
this painting, you respond to the image more visible than others, where, you know, image can appear different way, and then you either chose to ignore it or put something like really in opposed to that, you know.
Actually, I put in, why don't you put the second one next to it, Jeremy, so we could look at two of them together.
Yeah, terrific.
And we can make it a little bit bigger, both of them. Yeah, just a little, just bring it down a teeny weeny bit, please.
And also, you mentioned that they are painted on polyester, which is another...
Again, basically like the Chinese painting and like the goat painting and like the, there's all sorts of, I mean, surfing paintings, you'll see some of them, but basically it's a printed image that was in a yoga studio, my friend Eddie Stern's yoga studio. And I just thought that, you know, anything can be an image of a painting, somebody else's painting, something that already exists, a smudge of dirt, anything. Dirt is good too. But for example, this image gives birth to all sorts of ways to respond to it. So I think it's interesting to look at two of them, because obviously you could kind of paint anything. Yeah. Now, say there wasn't an image there at all. If you look, I think I started to paint these around the time that there was the Picasso show of works from 1932 that was at Larry's. Yeah. And, you know, there's all these different variations of yellow and orange and the way he wanted to paint Maria Therese. And obviously he doesn't want each painting to look the same. So to me, that particular figure is just an opportunity where you could see things coming out of the eyes or the nose. And there's a sort of cathartic premise that also exists originally in that particular god. So, you know, we all respond to things in different ways. We can take any path. But anyway, again, I think it was an opportunity to actually, if you take the one on the, you need to kind of look at these up close. You could kind of get closer where you could just see the way the paint sits on them. Yeah. Even closer. Yeah, closer. That's, you know what I mean? Because you really, that's better.
Yeah. So, Julian, these, does it bleed through the back of the canvas or not really, of the polyester?
Yeah, to a certain degree. Let's go. Yeah, that looks pretty good. Let's go to the next one. Just pan. You don't have to pan out. Just pan over to the right.
Oh yeah.
Get up closer to his face. Yeah, I mean, you know, there's a lot of stuff I was painting with my fingers. Yeah. And it's interesting the way the marks come out of the face. And, you know, I don't know what it means.
Yeah, neither do I. Can we see some of the painting in the architectural setting? This is another shift that I'd like to bring it up to, which is the set of these paintings, which I only seen one or two of them, but this book that you have it all together in Seville. This is 1980. I think. So how did that came about, Julian?
Well, this was in 1989.
89, okay.
What is that, 30 years ago?
Yeah.
30 years ago. The Junta of Andalusia had asked me if I wanted to have a show there, and they showed me a museum in Seville, and then I was driving by this building that had been abandoned, and I said, can we go in? Can we go into this building? And so we got the key and went in there, and I said, this is where I'd like to have the show.
Okay.
And it was a monastery that had been from 1492 that the army took over in the 20th century, and it was abandoned since the 50s.
Mm-hmm.
And so my father was in the ropa usada business, used clothes business, and he had these friends. And I was down in Mexico, and there was a tractor trailer that was broken down on the side of the road, and there was this thing that looked like an elephant skin lying on the floor, and it was the cover of the truck. So I bought it from the driver for $70 and hung it in this plant nursery where I was living and painted it there. And then I thought, I need some more of this material. So I bought 2 more of them from some other truck drivers at a truck stop. And then I asked my father if he knew I could get some army tarps. And so these paintings are painted on army tarps, and all the words that are in them come from the book, The Recognitions by William Gaddis.
Your friend. Mm-hmm.
And so rather than paint the place or make it affect the humidity or whatever, I just paintings in there. I didn't even fix the wall. There was a hole in the wall there, and I just hung the paintings. And I made 24 stations of the cross, so you could walk through this building and see these different paintings. And essentially, the words were the subject matter and the titles.
Yeah, Jeremy, can we see this next set of
there you go. So it was an amazing building. The architecture was amazing, and these cruciforms come from trucks. Basically, if you've got a truck, and you see a box on the back, the sides cover one thing, the flaps cover the side of the truck, and if you open them up, they automatically are cruciforms. And that room was very, very beautiful. And the whole place was amazing. And so in this next picture on the right, I thought, why clean it up? I mean, there were all these tin cups and temporary cots that were lying on the floor in there. So I just put a velvet curtain there and hung the paintings in there. That's Cortez on the left and Blessed Clara at the end.
Terrific. Same thing here. The next set of images are the one that actually very few have seen, because in Bordeaux, I mean, I've seen 1 or 2 in different contexts.
Shall we see that one at a time in this room? It's okay. Yeah, we could just make it, that's good. Just make it bigger now. Yeah, well, Jean-Louis Froment asked me if I wanted to make an exhibition there, and I walked into the room and it was pretty obvious what I needed to do. And so each of those paintings are 16 feet square. Mm-hmm. And so I decided to make them 16 feet square to fit in that particular place.
Yeah.
And all of the material came from Mystic, Connecticut, to the seaport, where I found these tarps that were covering boats.
Yeah.
These 3 were on the right were green.
Yeah.
Most of them were natural color. And if we go to the next image, you can see. So some of them, and this kind of pink and tan one, actually I found that material in the place where I bought this little painting of the girl with no eyes. So
okay.
So that was actually covering the store that had the small paintings in it. And then in most of them, I was drawing into them. Like if we get closer, say, to Harry, Daisy, and Bingo, which was the name of 3 dogs that I knew. If we bring it closer, there's a kind of drawing in them. I was sort of drawing images into the dirt, you know, where there was a very delicate kind of drawing that was going through them. And then it varied from where things were more like storytelling in a sense, or that seemed narrative, to other ones that were, if we pull out back again, we could further back, let's see, for example, the one next to Matilda. Okay, yeah, we could look at Matilda for a minute if you like. It says, it's a map of heaven and hell. So this is from the Divine Comedy. Matilda had an active and contemplative life. And I made this one for Rene Ricard. It said he sold all his tickets to the Betty Ford Clinic.
Okay. So, so Julian, do you think that your own sense of scale might have started with 2 things? Can we go to this next set of images, Jeremy? One, does it have to do with the fact you have...
Let's stay here for 1 second. The painting next to it, it's okay, we can be wherever. The one next to that one, Sorkin's was a restaurant that was on 6th Avenue on down near Chambers Street. And so it was a German restaurant and it was going out of business. So these paintings were just lying around. They were on the wall there. So I took that painting, put it on its side, and painted a violet dot and a line on it, and then hung it on this piece of material. And we were talking about dirt before, but the way that this painting is made is just because it was covering something in the rain, and as the dirt coagulated, it would make a veil. So that a lot of these paintings have this space in them that's really made just by nature.
Yeah, natural patina. So Julian, the next set of slides, let's look at it. I just want to bring it up because you have been surfing all your life. So these are providing the image background there. You think that the scale have a lot to do with...
Excuse me, there's no background, there's just ground.
Ground, very good. So surfing and painting outdoor, something that you have always insisted from the very beginning. So that helped to mediate your own sense of scale. I mean, is that fair thing to say?
I think that's pretty fair. That's a good thing to say, yeah.
Okay.
Herbie Fletcher took those photographs. We were at the Pipeline that day, and I wanted them to be in black and white. And but it's interesting how the white in the images of the waves is just the kind of white, or another kind of way that white sits on that material that's different than, say, the way that gesso sits on that material.
Yes, super true. We see...
and at the same time, it's such a difficult thing to describe the way you feel when you're doing that activity, because it happens. You have to be there in the present doing it, but it disappears as soon as it's happening.
Yeah.
So you keep wanting to do it again to recapture that feeling. And so it's, I was always wondering, you know, about painting. When I was a kid and I was looking at the movie, The Seven Samurai by Kurosawa, but how does a painting compare with the drama and the activity of seeing these Japanese warriors riding their horses through this mud in the rain? Yeah. And then I guess I thought, well, if you could just paint something on top of it and stop it, that would be a counterweight for that thing. And or, you know, I always try to make paintings so they're still. I don't want them to compete with movies. So I think movies can move, and there's a different kind of consideration. And I think, in a sense, maybe movies could feel more like sculpture, but I think paintings need to be still.
Yeah.
But I guess there's a lot of cross-pollination between whatever I do.
Yeah. So these form painted from on the ground, printed ground, and you react to it. So in the next set of images, where the form became sculptural. If you go next one, Jeremy, you see how
these paintings are from 2006 or
yeah.
8? Okay.
Let's do the next one. Let's see. Yes, this is what I meant.
Yeah, that's okay. So that particular sculpture is from 1982.
Yeah.
And the paintings are from 1989, I think.
Yeah.
But and obviously, yeah, there's sculptural forms that become. I mean, they're painted forms and sculptural forms, and yeah, that's at the Hall Foundation in Durnenberg. It was George Boslitz's old studio.
Yeah, exactly. So that's where I feel these painted forms are really sculptural property in a way, and from that series of Melancholy, which I like to very much shift to the next one to show Julian sculpture.
But before we get there, if you just look at the ground of these paintings, I mean, there's so many kind of marks, and I was gluing different pieces together, so it's not just one solid image of gray. There's
I see. Yeah.
There's a lot of activity and a lot of drawing. Essentially, I think that's drawing, the way that these things are affecting. And even this painting, if you look at it, it actually has gesso on it, but it also has oil paint on it also, where the, and those different, the way you put paint on, I mean, it sits differently on the material. It means something else.
Yes, absolutely. Jeremy, can we look at a few views of Julian's?
Yeah, we get closer to that. So this was in what was that, 89 or 90?
Yeah, 1990.
This was on the Chantarella in Bruno Bischofberger installed those sculptures with me on the top of it's in the Alps, and there was an ice skating rink there at the Chantarella. So here you could actually ski down and go among those sculptures. They were all about, I don't know, 13 feet tall.
Mm-hmm.
Closer.
Yep. Let's see.
Yeah, and so they were up there for I don't know, I guess a season. You know, they were up there for a year.
Yeah.
And Peter Handke actually wrote something about them. He talked about how they would crackle in the heat, in the sun, and it was like the way that rocks speak to each other in a stream.
Wow. Okay.
Very beautiful what he wrote.
Yeah, I need to look that up. Can we show the set of images where we were talking earlier, where Julian would dip this cloth in color, pigment, paint of sort, or ink perhaps, and then throw them against the canvas?
Yeah, tablecloths that I dipped in paint and threw at the canvas. It was a way of getting up there, you know, and also they're kind of like, in a sense, the Rorschach test, because I mean, you have something that's printed, and it looks like it's printed, like a gravure. We'll see when we see another image, but basically I could throw this and make an imprint right away, and it was a way of drawing, and at the same time, images would come out of them that were not predefined or prescribed. That would be more of a, I guess, chance has something to do with it. Anyway, I need to build. I actually made these paintings 22 feet square because they went in the Maison Carré in Nîmes. My studio had walls that were 16 feet tall, so I had to build those little stanchions on top so I could tie the paintings off. We could, you could see, and how the wind would kind of get behind them. Yeah. And there's pieces of material also. For example, the piece in the middle of that one is silk. It was from Tangier. So there's a lot of different sources that seem to kind of meld into something. Yeah. And also, we'll see another image. We can go to the next one. So that's the painting. That was on the left. And if you get closer to it, the red thing, that it's an AD, Anno Domini, but the red thing in the middle is what I was painting it with. And then I just stuck it in the middle. So I was hitting the canvas with that, but you could see the kind of marks that it would make. It looked like very precise kind of drawing. Go to the right a little bit, Jeremy. If you go up to the right, the up higher. Keep going. Yeah, it kind of looks like there's a guy that just jumped out of the ceiling, you know, or these are just marks that happen, just by throwing the material at the canvas, and then you end up with these very specific. It's a way of printing.
Yeah, and the next few painting are the one really.
This one is called Catherine Marie Ange. I wanted to call it Los Angeles, but this girl's name had the word angel in it, and her the door at the Maison Carré and Nîmes hadn't been open for 7 years, and her identity card was buried under the door, so I called that painting by her name. But if you get up close, it looks like there, God knows, dog balloons in there, or angels, or all sorts of different kind of things that are, you know, configurations of stuff that are haunting the painting. And then this white is very different than, say, the ground, which is the canvas color. So it sort of looks like they're clouds that are hanging on wires, but it's really just a bunch of marks.
With hands or brushes?
No, this is well, the gray and white are finger marks. The other stuff is made by throwing the material, and the black marks are made with a brush.
Okay, that makes sense. Yeah, so the next set of few images are really the one that I was interested. Go even.
But nice when you see the way the pink sits on the gray.
Yeah.
And kind of defines that. You know, people think it's a non-color most of the time. And if you see the three of them, there's a kind of rhythm from the way that the diagonal curved marks sort of move through there.
Oh.
There's a nice little film that Sante D'Orazio made when I was painting those, and Vito was a kid. I don't know where you could find it somewhere, but it's very beautiful what he did.
Yeah.
You could see it painted.
The next set of work are the one result from tying the canvases on the truck that you would drag them on the dirt road. So it accumulate these marks right there differently than from what we have seen. So here's a few examples right that we can see here.
Should we go back to when they were outside? Maybe we go back. Yeah, then let's get closer for a minute. So basically, yeah, you could get a little closer even. So yeah, all the black that's in these paintings, essentially I tied the painting behind the truck, behind the Jeep, and I dragged it on the highway, on the Montauk Highway, and the asphalt is essentially petroleum.
Yeah.
So when you have the weight of the canvas and it was folded like that, it printed that shape that looked like a stalactite, or looked like one of those things on the side of the beach. Yeah. And so I folded it in different ways from painting to painting to get different marks on there. Yeah. And that was a way of drawing. I was always trying to figure out how to make a larger stroke.
Mm-hmm.
And funny, because this was the time of Hurricane Bob, and there was a hurricane out there, and I couldn't move the paintings, so I tied them to the floor of the studio, and when the walls fell down in the studio, they didn't get hurt.
Yeah, let's see. Yeah, this is the one.
Yeah, you could see it more clearly there, a little smaller.
Mm.
Yeah, that's better. So it's interesting how specific the drawing looks. Yeah. This black drawing looks like I kind of done it with a pen or something.
Yes, it's true.
But the scale of it is quite large. I think there's another one there that you could see, and the way white sits on it, or oil paint. Yeah.
Yeah.
And it really looks like it could be something, whether it be photographic or the Eiger North Wall or a glacier. But it's interesting how marks get made, how printing completes the gestalt of your eye. And so I worked out there at the Warhol place for some years, and I had built that studio out there. This is called, these paintings are called Hatful of Rain. Mm-hmm. Which was a play written by Michael Gatso, the guy who played Frankie Pantangeli in The Godfather.
Oh yeah. Mm-hmm.
And what's up, buddy? What's up, bud? Anyway, yeah, where I had painted the bottom brown, it says "Hatful of Rain" and magic marker on them, and I was also throwing this this tablecloth at the paintings.
Yeah.
Oh, there were 5 of those.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
And then I guess in 2017, I was making these paintings. Max Holein was running the director of the San Francisco Museum of Fine Arts, the Legion of Honor, and he had this idea that I could do something out there in the courtyard. So I made 6 8-meter square paintings. Why don't we let Buddy out? Okay. So they're 8-meter square paintings that were tied to the columns in the courtyard. This was the beginning of one of them. That's at the studio in Montauk, where we live now.
Yep, we have more views here. Yep, those are.
Yeah. So here you can see the paintings when they were tied to the columns. That's The Thinker by Rodin, and those are some sculptures from 1982, but the paintings were made in 2017 out in Montauk. And the material is the material that was covering the fruit markets in the jungle near our place in Mexico.
Mm-hmm.
So I had this material sewn together. Some of them, in fact, this one, I guess, you know, this one I had sewn the pink and darker pink to the light blue and purple.
Yeah.
And other ones to make them 24 feet square. This one obviously is all more or less the same color, but if you saw it up close there, but if you look at them, the drawing in them is pretty similar to the drawing in the first plate paintings.
Mm-hmm.
And early wax paintings. And so these sort of forms, or these primordial kind of forms, seem to be useful sometimes. So you kind of come across these things. And this is a painting that was painted in 1990, but it's shown in 2007 at the Palazzo Venezia in Rome. And that's painted on a sail that was of a felucca sail of a boat in Egypt that was going down the Nile.
Mm-hmm.
So I made a group of paintings that were on this Egyptian cotton, or they were shapes like that. This is, we can go back for a second. Super interesting to show a painting like that in that kind of architecture.
Yes.
I mean, that was where Mussolini gave his speech on the balcony in the Palazzo Venezia, right out of that balcony. And but I had to superimpose the works a little bit in front of the wall, because you couldn't put any nails into the wall because there's fresco on the wall. But there was I thought it was a great privilege to get to put that object in that setting.
Yeah, no, it looks fantastic.
And this is a painting that was made down in Mexico and in Australia, that from material that was in Mexico, that's at the Legion of Honor. Again, this curve that was in there was already there. I just decided that the shape would be like that, but
Mm-hmm.
you kind of, obviously we have to remember that we're just looking at pictures of paintings. We're not looking at paintings.
Yes.
But there's a whole world that seemed to be in that curve to me. Go back for a minute. Yeah, I mean, there's a bunch of things where they've repaired and they're sewn and there's seams that look like scars. And these kinds of events occur in these other paintings that were shown or on show at Pace. But if let's go back to pictures for a moment. Yeah, so just to kind of see that in that kind of a setting and see those sculptures of Rodin, those kind of start just looking at the forms, or I don't know, things seem to have a dialogue with other things. And it's sort of time gets compressed.
Yeah, absolutely.
Let's go. We can jump ahead now if you want. Yeah. So these materials were the same color. It's the same that was on that large painting that was at in San Francisco, and I started these a couple of summers ago and put ink on them, which is the kind of fuzzy purple part that's in the ground. And then about a year later, I decided to paint something else on them. And so this is a studio out in Montauk last summer.
Can we see a few in action here? Yeah.
Yeah, I was, again, okay, so this one had these, this was part of one piece that was covering, I cut it into 4 pieces, and the sun was obscured from it because it was tied in a knot. And so the part that was tied in a knot had these dark lines that looked like rays radiating out of it. And I didn't want to get rid of them. So I built the stretchers to include those marks. They're made out of aluminum. Ron Lessard built them out of aluminum, and there's a wooden edge on them.
Yeah.
We could see another one. I just threw this painting in here because this is a painting from 1986 called The Migration of the Duckbill Platypus to Australia.
Mm-hmm.
And this is a painting I always liked. If you make it a little smaller, you have to see because the white at the bottom is actually painted.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, and then it was a drop cloth that was bleached by the sun. And then actually it looks kind of like paintings that Sterling Ruby makes.
Yeah.
I mean, different, but pretty similar. Anyway, and there was, go back for a minute. This is a Tonka from the 19th century that was just sewn, the face of it's just buried in there. So there's a secret in that painting. I liked it, but the other side was really good too. And on the left, if you see all those marks are it's basically dirt that made the irregularity on the left side. But it's amazing how, let's make it closer, how this how the bleach just made it look like it was some kind of a image. Go to the right a little. Yeah, it looks like you're looking at the lagoon in Venice with the way the trees come up on the islands there.
Yes.
On a kind of gray day in November.
Yeah, it's true.
Okay, let's see something else.
Yeah, we're gonna go now to the recent work.
Julian. Yeah, and this painting, so the reason I put that there is that painting's always sort of in my head in a way.
Yeah.
And so I wanted to see this one. Let's look at one first, Jeremy, just the one on the left. I was thinking about the duckbill platypus when I was painting this because who knows why. They're just things that seem to contradict each other and defy each other and then force you to sort of stop somewhere. But it's just an accumulation of marks, but I felt like this one related to that. So I wanted to show this painting.
Yeah.
We can look at the other one now too, or just the next one, yeah. Very different when you have a horizontal line in it because you feel like it's a landscape or it's a room immediately. Sorry.
Julian, these seem to have more painterly passages that you don't really seen before in a way. So they are really reinventing the different gesture that I don't remember seeing previously. Is that fair to say?
Oh, no. I mean, I could probably pull out a bunch of paintings that look more like that, but obviously, hopefully, I'm not just copying myself. I mean, I definitely don't want to do that. So if I can, Chris Walken once said to me, if you can't surprise yourself, how do you expect to surprise anyone else?
Right.
I think that that's a good thing to remember. And I hadn't seen anything that looked like this. So I was very happy to make this painting. You don't know if it's beautiful or not, but you think it's probably good.
Okay. I think we have one more, the last one before we open.
Image on the left where the purple comes out, because all of these paintings were actually that color. They were dark purple, so it's the sun that bleached it and made it this grayish blue.
Especially the bottom corner on the left that you described earlier.
Yeah, that's the color. That was the color of all this material.
Exactly.
And that was the part that was tied in a knot, and that's how you ended up with that that mark.
I think we have one more, Jeremy, before we open up question for our listener.
Yeah. Okay, and this one obviously doesn't have those gradations in the corner. But I made the shape of this so it wouldn't be rectangular, because again, you know, it for me it felt like it was more personal that way. And when I was hanging these things between the trees, it wasn't rectangular, and I liked the fact that it wasn't. And I spent so much time trying to get my stretchers straight when I was a kid, and I was a terrible carpenter. So I think the freedom of being able to make them any way I want now is.
You certainly have a new repertoire of format there, that's for sure. So why don't we do this, Julian? We stop now, and then we'll go to Charlie to see whether we have questions from our friends.
Sure.
We do indeed have questions, and thank you very much for that vivid and enlightening conversation. The first question we have comes from Liz Marcus. Liz, I am going to unmute you now. If you're still here and you'd like to ask your question, go ahead, Liz.
Hey, hi everyone. Julian, thank you for doing this. This was a really nice thing to happen today.
Where are you?
It's great to see all that work again. And, you know,
Excuse me, seeing Liz Marcus now or not?
I'm over here.
Where are you?
Somewhere in the grid.
Just raise your hand so I could see you.
I don't think he can see her.
I don't think I can see you. Do you want me to see you? I mean,
I have my video on, but there might
There's a speaker view button at the top right of your screen, Julian.
speaker view.
speaking so you can see.
I'm a little retarded when it comes to this.
Say again, what is it?
The question is,
Speaker button somewhere. Where's the? I'm sorry, Jeremy. One moment.
right.
So in the top right of your screen, there is a button, and on iPad, it's probably a little square looking thing with 3 dots on it. If
Maybe
you press it, you'll see who is speaking front and center.
Is that share content? No.
Let's see what it says. One says, sorry.
Oh.
It says
Mute, stop video, share content.
Participants, leave meeting. Fuck it. I'm sorry.
That's all right. So the question is, so and it's not a, I'm not being critical at all.
All right. Okay. I'd like to see the people talking to me if I can.
Maybe this one. Let's see.
Hi.
Okay, now we see you.
Hi there.
Hi, Julian. So the question is, so you pull, especially in the past, you pulled a lot from other cultures. And I'm all for it. I think that if that wasn't allowed, we wouldn't have Van Gogh and some other artists. But I wonder if you think that if you were a young artist doing that now, would you sort of be allowed to do that? Or would you get a lot of criticism for doing that? Do you know what I mean?
I think artists can do whatever they want.
Yeah, I agree.
They're going to get criticized, particularly if it's good. And so, you know, you have to keep, I don't want to say the word you know, I'm going to try not to say, I said it 3 times, I think, in the course of this talk, but, and is just as bad as you know. That being said, when there's somebody that does something and it's provocative, it might piss you off at first. But at the same time, there's something of value there. Maybe it's also not even fully cooked by the time they show it to you.
Yeah.
But for example, there was this guy named Daniel Russian guy that I met a few times, and he had a show in Germany, and he made paintings where he'd take paintings of other people. For example, he'd take a Boslitz painting and he'd paint his version of that painting, but it was obvious that it was the Boslitz painting, but he changed it around in some way. And you think of what can people do? I think whatever they can do in some way is viable. Maybe it's terrible, maybe it's not. I mean, but as far as people criticizing those things, I think if you let the criticism stop you, then you should just stop. But I think you have to speak to yourself. And for example, I was thinking about Don Judd since I saw the show, and it was so obvious that he needed to find, and any artist that's really worth their salt, they need to find whatever it is that is useful to them. And there's things that might be really fine for other people, but doesn't necessarily work for them. So you have to make your own path and invent your own system.
Yeah.
And so usually, I remember the first time I showed the first plate painting to Gary Steffen and David Diao at my studio after we came back from Max's Kansas City one night, and I thought I had created this incredibly great thing. But Gary Steffen's response at that time was definitely not. He says, "Well, that's not a painting. That's a So I thought, okay, yeah, maybe it's not a relief to you, but I still think it's a painting. But yeah. I think we make things that question what is painting. I think that's, or what is sculpture, what is art. I think that is the job of the artist. I think that's usable. What is usable? What do you need? And anyway, next.
I love that. That's great. Thank you.
Sure.
Yes,
thank you.
Thanks very much. The next question comes from Scott Lerner. Scott, I'm going to unmute you now and you can ask your question.
A little big where I can see everybody else.
Thanks, Charlie. My question was about referentiality in your work. When I look at some of your paintings, I get the reference, and like I've read Ozymandias, so I know the poem. But with paintings that reference something like the Recognitions, I haven't read Gaddis. So I'm sort of curious, do you imagine your audience having a familiarity with the things you reference? Are you trying to encourage them maybe to look at other artists or the people that you're referencing?
There's a couple of questions in one there. No? Okay. No, I don't think that somebody needs to read the Recognitions in order to appreciate those paintings. In fact, when I it's a very difficult book also. But when I read the book and I got to this passage where basically all those titles that are in those paintings looked like they were titles of fictitious books in a fictitious library. And it's funny how words will just stick out. Sometimes you could write the word "the." I'm sure this has happened to you. And you look, God, it just doesn't look quite right, the word "the." A word that you think is so familiar. And so in a way, those paintings, those names of those books in that fictitious library screamed off the page at me and said, "Oh, we're paintings." So I thought, okay, this is subject matter. And then I thought I thought, okay, I'm listening to this catalog of words. So one says, Blessed Clara. One says, the Teddy Bear's Picnic. Another one says, Ignatius of Loyola. Another one says, Henner. Another one says, On Bees. And so these words seem to address so many different things that there's a leveling that I think that, Walt Whitman, he talked about a horizontal plane where everything existed on this horizontal plane, where a tree wasn't more important than a word, or everything could be personified in some way. And he also said, it's okay if I contradict myself, I contain multitudes. But that attitude towards a horizontal plane is something that gave me a lot of freedom. And I think it's useful. And if somebody read Gaddis because I made the paintings, that would just be a bonus because he's a great writer. But I think that the visual, just the visual appearance of the words gave birth to the paintings for me. And I felt like, again, army materials, because they've been used for war, have a connotation to them. And I think the idea that the Cuartel del Carmen in Sevilla was a place that was went from being a convent to something that was used by the army. And then there were the names of all these people that had been killed in the war in the hallway of the grand hall of this abandoned building. That spoke to me in a way. And I think about the way language is used. And I think, I write in Spanish, Italian, French sometimes, and it's not that I speak all these languages so perfectly, I don't. But I think that to some people, those words are going to look familiar, and to other people, they're going to look strange and foreign. And I think that that space in between that is fine. I think that has to do with subjectivity and perspective.
Right.
Thank you. That's a great answer.
Thank you, Julian. Thank you, Liz. The next question is from Melora Griffiths. Melora, I'm going to unmute you so that you can ask your question.
Okay. Can you hear? I'm unmuted now.
I can hear you.
Okay. Hi, Julian. I actually met you at the Judd opening. I introduced myself to you.
Okay.
And I have other questions since you've been talking, but the question that I put in the chat is your prolificity in making of films and painting sculpture predominantly driven by invention and discovery or executing ideas? I'm also interested in your relationship with detail. And I'm in Shelter Island right now.
All right. I hope you're safe and comfy. It's a nice place to be. Okay. I can't remember your question almost. I think that I don't really think that there's a separation from invention and from the desire to see. I think there's a desire to see something. What do you do with your life? I mean, my friend Bob Williamson once said, do you find out that life is taking up all your time? And I think that's correct. I mean, what are you going to do every day? And what do you do that actually takes away the ordinariness of, or feeling ordinary, or feeling, or altering, if you can alter your reality. And for me, if I can work on something where I have to discover something and come to know something through the act of doing that, that's my pleasure. And it's also my work to do that. And I've been lucky enough to have that opportunity. So whether it's, I don't think I ever made a film to illustrate what I knew. I think I did it so I could find out something about the thing I was curious about. And I don't think that I make paintings to illustrate what I know. I usually, or always, start to do something that I don't know, that I see an opportunity or possibility that might be somewhere that it will take me that I haven't been.
Great.
Thank you. Thank you. The next question comes from a former rail worker, actually, Nick Heskes. Nick, I'm going to unmute you and let you ask your question.
Hi, Julian. Hi, my question is, to what extent do you think an artist can maintain hold over the development of their own work? Since it seems yourself, you've relied a great deal on the faith in chance, surprise, and accident.
But what's the beginning of your question?
To what extent do you think an artist can maintain a hold over the development of their own work, like the sort of trajectory?
I don't think that chance or accident is not part of having control over your work. I think what you're doing is you're open to what's going to happen in the course of what you're doing. So for example, let's say you're making even a very conventional painting and you have a brush in your hand and say that you were trying to do one thing, but maybe it didn't exactly come out the way that you wanted it to come out. But you look at it, you go, you know, that's much better than the way that I wanted it to come out. In fact, why did I pick up this brush? This brush that I used wasn't the brush that I intended to, but it just made a mark in a certain way that was much better than what I thought it would be. So I think that you can set up, and again, for example, when I made a painting like Cortez, there was this big tarp that I had gotten, and it had some holes in it and things. But it was lying in my studio on the 3rd floor before I changed the building, and there was a leak in the skylight. And there was this extraordinary stain that the rain made on this piece of material. So I didn't want the stain to dry up and go away, so I got some Damar varnish and linseed oil out, and I painted in the stain. So I had a choice. Obviously, I could have let it dry and the stain would have disappeared, or I made something out of that. Mm-hmm. And then I ended up gluing this piece of baldacchino from the 17th century in the middle of it, and it looked like a time map. So was I not responsible for that stain? I'd say that I said thank you to the heavens or wherever it came from. And I incorporated into my intention. I could have thrown the piece of material away and said, okay, it's ruined. That's not what I want to do. So I think it's really about selecting what you want to do. You know, I've said before, there's no personal language. There's just a personal selection of language. So did that answer your question?
Yeah, to a certain extent. I mean, I've also had a lot of cases like that where, I mean, I had a painting that the wind blew it over, it ripped, and so I sewed in the ripped hole, and it actually was on the forehead of a figure in the painting. So sometimes it can kind of happen in that funny way. But
so did you feel responsible for the painting, or did you feel like, oh, I wish it didn't happen, or did you feel like it was a good thing that it happened?
Well, it was a good thing that happened. Sometimes it's not a good thing, but that was a good thing. And then, I mean, later there was an incident where I got hit in the head, and it sort of was a weird premonition kind of thing with that painting.
Was that the artist is responsible for what they put in? That's basically it. You are responsible for what you put in the world, whether you're a photographer or a painter or whatever you do. You're responsible for that thing that you're putting in the world beyond your death. It's not about selling something or whatever. You're going to put that there, and you know, you're going to think, okay, if some kid or some other person or whatever walks up to this thing at some moment, they're going to see what I had to say or what it meant, what my life meant. Essentially, that's it.
Mm. Thank you.
Next.
Thanks, Nick. Thanks, Julian. We've got time for one more question. I'm sorry we're not going to get to everyone who sent me a question in the chat bar. You've all been very lively and quite patient. I'm going to end with a question from Lydia Rubio, and then we're going to go to our poem. Lydia, I'm going to unmute you now so you can ask your question.
Nick, do you have a time limit?
I want to put
Wait,
on.
let me ask you a question. Excuse me 1 minute. Hi, Lydia. Nick, is it Nick?
Yeah.
Do you have, not Nick, who was I just talking to? That's
Oh, no.
That was Nick.
Yeah.
No, you.
Hello.
Oh, me,
Yes.
Charlie. Yes. Yes, Julian. I'm sorry. We are closing at 3.
Do you have to close at 3, or do you want to keep talking for a while if people have more questions?
Let's keep it going, Charlie.
Okay,
mean,
sure.
Charlie, if you want to do it, I can do it a little longer. I mean, you know, Joseph Beuys kept the Kunst Academy open. He let anybody that wanted to come into it come, and it looked like Russia in 1917. But if you want to do this a little longer, I can do that.
Cool.
You're hungry, right? Okay, but I think we should do this for a little bit if people really want to know something. If I can be helpful in some way, I will do it. It's up to you.
Great. Thank you very much for your generous time, Julian. I will ask a few more. I will bring in a few more of the questions in that case. For now, Lydia, we'll still go to you next. If you'd like to ask your question, you should be unmuted.
Yes, I think I am, right?
You're unmuted, yes. Hi, Lydia.
Do you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, great. Listen, first of all, I want to thank you for being so generous with the information and your participation in this forum. And I have a great admiration for, I have felt throughout the presentation a sensibility, an artistic sensibility that now I understand more, that I see defined through your paintings, through your life. Then I see also the films that you've done that I admire greatly. And for example, I was a personal friend of Reinaldo Arenas, and the film that you did of Before Night Falls is extraordinary, like other films, like, you know, The Driving Bell and the Butterfly and other things that you've done. But then I want to ask you about, how do you see the sensibility, or how could I see the sensibility of you were doing your painting versus that man that does the film? The two sensibilities, how do you pair that into one person? I'd like to know what you think.
Lydia, eres cubano?
Yes, I am an artist based in Hudson. I am from Cuba. I understand that you also met Guillermo Gabriel Infante, that you speak Spanish. It's wonderful.
Good friend of mine. In fact, I made a group of paintings called...
passed away, you know.
Yeah, I know that. I made a group of paintings called Vista del Amanecer en el Trópico.
Oh my God, that is one of the most beautiful books of Guillermo, and was translated by a very close friend of mine. And I have been in that world for many, many years. When I was in New York, I met him too.
Exactly. We were lucky to know him. So anyway,
but may I just say that relating to your culture, your broad culture, that's what makes your work and your mind so rich. And that's what, referring to a previous comment of an artist that was asking about influences of other cultures, that is the basic thing that we should all try to get. That literature, music, all of that together to produce works. So,
well, you know, there's so many things that have been an influence on me. And I mean, everything really, there's so many things. I mean, Tom, when you say that, I just thought about Tom Waits for a little while, because he's such a beautiful guy, and his songs, there's so many songs of his that in difficult moments in my life come to me. And Lou Reed was my great friend, and his record Berlin meant so much to me in 1973 that later, when we knew each other really well, I made this film with him about where he got to play those songs alive after 35 years, since the record had come out. And but anyway, I never thought I was going to be a filmmaker. I mean, I think Tarkovsky is a great filmmaker. Titone was a great filmmaker. I think that, and so I never really thought I was going to be a filmmaker. But when Jean-Michel Basquiat died, a guy came to talk to me about him, and I thought I could help him because I knew something about the world. But he didn't really want to listen, and ultimately I had to get back the material, rewrite the script, and made the movie. I did it sort of as a rescue. But the thing is that I was always interested interested in films, and it was a big part of my life. I grew up in a very ordinary place. My house was very ordinary, and there was no art in it. There was no architecture in it. It was a modest place, and I needed somehow to create something, an old world for myself, in order to exist, I guess. But the thing is that there's things that you can do in painting that you can't do in film. And there's a part of my brain that's a storyteller, I guess. And so, you know, I've written quite a few different things, and I wrote a book called Nicknames and Maitre d's and Other Excerpts from Life about my experience as a young painter. But I think my contribution really is, I think it's harder to be a painter. And it's something that people that like paintings don't necessarily need to have an answer. They're okay with the mystery. When people go to the movies, they want it to be tied up in a knot somehow at the end so they understand what happened. I think people that look at paintings don't necessarily need to know that. They could just look at what's presented and exist in that. And so obviously there's part of my sensibility that appreciates that stasis that doesn't have an answer. And then at the same time, I guess I've tried to address infinity somehow, or simultaneity of time and death in my films and in my paintings. So I guess that it's a topic big enough to use all different kinds of impulses that somebody might have. And I guess the more films I made, the more familiar I was with the material. So I think I progressed a bit.
No, definitely. And when you say Tarkovsky, well, I'm referring also to the formal aspects of your photography, your films. For example, the poetics of Tarkovsky, obviously that's a reference to you. And also the simplicity of your paintings, especially as you progress to the end, to now, no? Not the end, but now. It's like a distillation of form.
Yeah, we're all at eternity's gate.
Thank you.
Thank you. Gracias, muy amable.
Gracias, gracias.
Thank you, Lydia. Thanks, Julian. The next question comes from Kadar. Kadar, I'm going to unmute you so that you can ask your question.
Cool, thank you. Can everybody hear me all right?
Yeah.
Thank you for taking the time and doing this. I'm super appreciative. I guess two things. One is just like a personal question. Someone mentioned to me once that you made furniture for one of your exhibitions. I've never been able to find images of it. I was wondering if that's true, and if so, for what exhibition? And then more so, the question that I was really thinking of watching your whole presentation is how you used and have used different techniques and approaches to painting as a way to kind of differentiate your voice and break away from painting history. And I was wondering if you could just talk to that point and talk to your relationship to painting, to gesture, to using these new materials and these new approaches to the canvas and beyond the canvas as a way to kind of free yourself from the weight of history, if that makes sense.
Okay. It's funny because I was sitting in a bar with Richard Serra when I was a kid, and I once said to him, I don't even know if he would remember this, I said, we all got to get rid of our personal history. And then he gave me a ride up to see Bryce Marden's show at Bikehurt Gallery in his station wagon. And then when we were in the car, he said, well, what kind of paintings do you paint? And I said, oh, I make projective drawing test paintings. And he said, what do you mean? I said, you know, like draw yourself when you're 30, draw yourself when you're 40. It was when in the period, obviously, where you saw the formal painting and his dog. I said, well, I'm really only interested in Bryce Marden's paintings and Ellsworth Kelly's paintings, which I thought that was fine. But he was very nice, and he gave me a ride up there, and we've known each other since. But anyway, I needed to find for myself, I mean, I came back to New York in 1973 in the summer, and I needed to find a way to make art that actually spoke to me. I think everybody needs to do that ultimately. And what I'm surprised about a lot of the time is how accepting people are of the way of art materials and of the way putting paint on canvas. And obviously we've seen people, I can see your painting behind your head, where you're trying to find a new way to make a mark that will create another kind of space. Yeah. And that is valid, a way to go. For example, in the goat paintings that I made, and I only showed one of them because I thought that it ended up being quite satisfying, to see a bunch of images instead of just a couple. I mean, Max Holein once did a talk with me where he just showed 7 images, and I was surprised how articulate he could be and precise about that. But I kind of wanted to give a wider range of appearances, and because you can have the same attitude, but your paintings don't have to all have the same appearance. And I think sometimes we become a slave to signaturizing. There's a lot of artists whose work really I thought was interesting at one time that lost me, because it's just they make stuff that looks like other things that they've made. And so I think it's but it's interesting the way, say, ink will sit on polyester. It's very different in the way oil paint will sit on polyester. And it's also different when there's an image that's porous, that's a part of the fabric of that thing, or there's another one where there's something that's sitting on top of it. And I think that these issues have to do with time. I mean, Louise once said to me, because, you know, I didn't know what the white marks really meant. You know, my dad say, what's a white mark? I said, oh, that's the abstract one. But really, I think what she said is it's the present and beyond. And I think there was something about admitting that something is really never done. It's never finished somehow. And the open-endedness of that was very, somehow I needed to establish that for myself in order not to be too accepting of a particular style. And I think Gian Enzo Speroni was very disturbed. He's a very good friend of mine, very disturbed at one time when I was making these wooden paintings in 1982 in Porto Ercole, because there were no figures in them. There were no plates on them. There were, you know, why do you have to be such a chameleon? He said, I went to a lumber yard in Porto Ercole and they had metric sizes of plywood, different than the 4x8 sheets that you have in the United States that are so boring. So they had beautiful proportions of all these different pieces of material. And so I bought the plywood there because I thought, isn't it great to work on that surface, but not have to have a seam in it? And so I made 11 wooden paintings that were the predella panels for these plate paintings in my show at Mary's. If you look on the website, I think you probably could see an image of that show. I've been trying to fix the website or work on it for a while, but so, you know, it's different. If you look at, say, El Greco's paintings that are on wood, they're different than the paintings on canvas. The way that paint sits on wood is very, very different. And or the way, say, Blinky Palermo's paintings are painted on aluminum, or the Stoffbilder paintings that he painted. And but I think that's a pretty open field right now with people trying to make paintings in all different sorts of ways. And I still look at a lot of painting and find it to be pretty boring and pretty predictable.
Thanks, Julian. Thanks, Kedar.
Thank you.
We're going to go to Phong Bui before we go to our poem.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, you know, Julian, I want to be sure that you and Louise get your lunch, you know. She's waiting for you. So
she's tough. She's tough. And she's actually, you know, I think she appreciates what's happening here. And I think what you're doing, what you guys are trying to do, or not trying to do, but doing. And, you know, we're here. You know, Peter Beard walked out of the house the other day and he disappeared. And they're looking for him in the neighborhood here, but there's state troopers or whatever out. And I don't know, you know, he's a pretty tough guy and he's able to do, if anybody can be outside for 3 days in this cold, brutal weather, I guess he can. But I'm a little concerned because nobody's found him yet. But
such a good man. But so Julian, listen, I wanted to say this one thing, which in a way is a question, but it's essentially an answer to a previous earlier call listener who asked that question. I think his name is Scott Lerner, and somehow maybe relate to Lydia too. The first one is really came from one of the best things I've ever written on you by Rudy Fuchs. Terrific essay on you, which Scott, you hear this. What Rudy say about Julian is that he's trying to do anything, bend in art where it has to go. And I really appreciate how Rudy make comparison Julie's work with Astro Pound, particularly his cantos in the end, because they were loud, but they were loud ecstasy, but they also about lamentation as well. So it's not just one without the other. And the other referred to earlier when I was thinking about you loving water. You know, basically you grew up with that, you serve still, and immediately came to mind that, you know, Jean Vigo's second film was about the famous French swimmer, Jean Taris.
Uh-huh.
Silent film. It's all about underwater. It's all about the swimming and close up and all the incredible cinematic invention, you know, freeze frames and close to the swimmer body. And it just occurred to me, similar your love, your admiration for Vigo Latalon, you know?
Exactly, the scene where the woman is walking in her wedding gown across the barge in the middle of the night.
Exactly, but also don't forget Jean, who swam under the water to find her.
Sees her, exactly, yes, of course, when she went to town.
Exactly, and that to me, it evokes so much of the beauty of the diving bell and butterfly, because when Jean Dominique was in hospital, he began into pondering about all of his so-called missed opportunity, and then there's several segments under the water. Remember? So
yeah, of course.
Yeah. Anyway, I mean, I love that film. But so there are more friends who want to talk about film and painting, but we kind of have to save that for the next part 3, Julian. Is that
we can do this again if you feel like it. I mean, it wasn't painful. It was a pleasure to talk to everybody, and I think we kind of, I hope everybody liked it. It was okay. It was good. It was not painful at all. So it's a nice thing to do. I think you're a good man. And I also really appreciate your enthusiasm, because I know that, well, you know that Jonas Mekas was my great friend. And I love that he injected you with some of himself. And so you can continue his enthusiasm and augment it in your own way. But I think that it's great that you're documenting things and that you care about other artists. I think that's a big deal. So I appreciate that.
Thank you, Julian. Go back to Charlie. Charlie.
Thanks, guys. This has been a really, really incredible, wonderful conversation. I've been watching the chat bar, and hundreds of people have been in here very much enjoying it. I am so grateful, and I speak for so many people when I say that. We're going to conclude with a tradition at the Rail, which is to have one of our colleagues read a poem. Today, the poem will be read by Madeline Cravens. Madeline, would you like to carry us through?
Is my audio good?
Yeah.
Amazing. Hi, everyone. So I've been rereading the work of John Berryman. He's an amazing poet who died in the 70s, and I'm rereading his dream songs. And this book, I think, was written in a lot of solitude, so probably good for this time. And just one thing to know about this poem, he references a man named Henry, who's sort of like his central protagonist throughout this book. So this is Dream Song 14. Dream Song 14. Life, friends, is boring. We must not say so. After all, the sky flashes, the great sea yearns. We ourselves flash and yearn. And moreover, my mother told me as a boy, repeatedly, ever to confess you're bored means you have no inner resources. I conclude now I have no inner resources because I am heavy bored. People bore me, literature bores me, especially great literature. Henry bores me with his plights and gripes as bad as Achilles, who loves people and valiant art, which bores me. And the tranquil hills and gin look like a drag, and somehow a dog has taken itself and its tail considerably away into the mountains or sea or sky, leaving behind me, Wag. Have a great day, everyone.
I got a poem for you.
Mm-hmm.
Not right this second, but you should read the Musée des Beaux-Arts by W.H.
By Auden, how everything turns so neatly away from a disaster.
Exactly. Ray Fiennes gave me that poem. It's
incredible poem. Yeah. I was actually, that's so funny because I was deciding between that poem and this poem. That's,
well, there you go.
We're having a mind meld.
Another really great one you should read maybe at this time is The Parade Ends by Reinaldo Arenas.
Parade Ends. Okay, great. Thank you.
Thank you for that.
Thank you for joining us.
Okay.
Thank you, Julian. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye, everybody.
Thank you all.
I'm gonna stick your Bye.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Have a great lunch, you guys.
Bye, Amanda. Bye, Lydia. Bye, Rose.
Oh, bye, Chris. Bye, Tam.
Bye.
Bye, Julian.
Bye. 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 Bye, Phong.
We'll talk soon. Have a great lunch, okay?
See
Ciao.
you, man.
Ciao. Grazie.
Thank you.
Thank you.
It was good.
That's a great poem. Yeah.
Thank you, Julian. Thank you, Luis.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Have a good lunch.